Happy Hoppy Hour, beer lovers. Welcome to the first inaugural episode of the Hoppy Girl Podcast. I'm your host, Lindsey. Let's get started. But first, if you haven't listened to our trailer episode that we're lovingly calling the Taster episode, go back and listen to that one. It's going to give you an overview of everything we want to do with the podcast and get you set up for the next few episodes. When thinking about how I wanted to start this first episode, what better way to start with the history of beer in America and also in my home state, Colorado. So this one's going to be a two-parter. The first part's going to be a history on beer in America, and the next part will be a history on beer in Colorado. So let's get started. With the start of each episode, I want to shout out either the brewery that I'll be at or the beer I'll be drinking, or both, because duh. However, with these first few episodes, in order to avoid any favoritism, I'm going to keep it a little more subtle and just drop hints on what I'm drinking and where I am. But I can let you know I have a lot of beer connections, and they've lovingly opened their homes to me for these first few episodes. So cheers. All right, let's get started with the history on beer in America. This is nice and hoppy. Anyway, okay, so the earliest recording of brewing in the United States was in 1578. The first documented brewery, however, was in New Amsterdam, which we now call New York. It was owned by the Dutch West India Company in 1632, and it was located on Brewer Street. So today, that area is Lower Manhattan in New York City, and the street has since been changed to Stone Street. So in the 17th and 18th centuries, more the 17th century, most beer drinking Americans actually homebrewed. There wasn't a big need for any mass production or anything like that, so most people know how to homebrew. As areas picked up in population, homebrewing actually became more dangerous. Bringing ingredients to a boil started fires a lot of the time, so that's when more commercialized brewing started. An interesting fact that I was reading as I was learning about early drinking is that most beer was under 4% ABV, so it didn't have a high alcohol content. And women and children actually were seen to be drinking what they called small beers. So these were beers that were brewed with the leftovers of the bigger beers, again, only 4%. So these beers were 1% or sometimes even non-alcoholic, but women and children were drinking them. Why? It was safer than water. Because of the traditions brought over to the United States by Germany, by England, and by the Netherlands, beer was actually introduced into our society traditionally one of the more common alcoholic beverages choice. So things like rum were actually cheaper, but because of our ancestors, beer ended up being more popular. Another fun little fact, the founding fathers, most of them were brewers. George Washington specifically, our first president, was known for being a pretty active brewer. He had a recipe that was actually reviewed as being superb. So good for him. So at the start of the 1840s, not many lagers in the United States were being brewed. That's because a strain of yeast that needed to be brought over from England, and I'm not going to butcher the name because that's ridiculous. So for all my YouTube viewers, the name is written on the screen. For all my podcast listeners, you can find that name in the show notes, but I'm not going to embarrass myself this bad on the first episode. Anyway, that couldn't be shipped over from England because it would spoil on the trip. So the first unique American beer style was called a steam beer. It evolved in the San Francisco area, and it was the goal of it was basically to produce a lager-like beer, but without refrigeration. Eventually, the trip from England became shorter, and refrigeration became a little bit easier, so that yeast was eventually brought over, which the German immigrants, mostly in St. Louis, loved. Okay, let's go to some history on brewing and brewing operations. So our oldest operating brewery is D.G. Yuengling and Sons, commonly known as Yuengling today. It's still operating, so this again is the oldest operating brewery in the United States. It was established in 1829 in Pottsville, Pennsylvania. The name is linked to a German word that means youngster or young people. The flagship beer, Yuengling Traditional Lager, which was labeled as an amber lager pre-prohibition, which is interesting. Another fun fact about Yuengling that I did not know and now know today is that they produce ice cream. So they did from 1920 to 1985, and then they re-brought it back in 2014. Okay, let's keep going with our early brewing operations. So in the early 1840s, one of the largest scale breweries opened, Best Brewing Company in Milwaukee. We now call that brewery Pabst Brewing Company. They are headquartered in San Antonio, Texas. They, fun little fact, survived Prohibition by making cheese-like products and eventually sold that to craft. So for all my mac and cheese lovers out there, you're welcome, kids. We can thank Pabst Brewing Company for their sell of cheese-making products to craft. So we all know that American lager PBR, known as Pabst Blue Ribbon. It's featured in a number of songs, movies, TV shows. South Park, a very popular show, has actually referred to it multiple times, sometimes in kind of a negative way.
How did that get here? It says it's a Pabst Blue Ribbon.
What is it?
It's like beer, but different.
But despite that, PBR is pretty popular and celebrated across the United States. PBR has made the top 10, tying for fourth, with the single beer with the most medals won at a GABF event. They've won 8 medals, 4 golds. Pabst Brewing Company in total has won 73 GABF medals. They're in the top 4 breweries overall, according to an article written in 2020. All right, let's take a pause. We need to take a beer break. Cheers, everybody. Ooh, that's good. Okay, 1860. Eberhard Anheuser, a candle and soap maker, purchased a struggling brewery in St. Louis and brought on his son-in-law, Adolphus Busch, to start running this small operational brewery. Later, the brewery would be called Anheuser-Busch, and Budweiser, one of the most popular beers in America, came into operation or into effect in 1876. Budweiser itself was inspired by Busch's travels in Europe. He was really interested in Bohemian lagers, and so the name Budweiser actually is a take on a Bohemian lager, but also with German roots. Similar to PBR, Anheuser-Busch and Budweiser are pretty decorated in the GABF world. Anheuser-Busch has a total of 76 medals as a brewery, and Budweiser has a total of 7 medals, 2 golds, 2 silvers, and 3 bronze. Adolphus Busch was actually kind of innovated at his time. So he, in order to mass produce and mass distribute, he purchased a bunch of rail cars that were refrigerated, and he started that trend towards pushing beers further out than where he was brewing. So he was pretty innovative and sort of ahead of his time for that style and that part of the brewing industry. In 1912, Joseph Schultz Brewing Company in Milwaukee started using brown bottles to distribute their beer, and they were kind of the beginning of that trend. Brown bottles obviously were used to keep the stability and quality of beer while it was being shipped and distributed. Okay, so we're in the early 1900s, and we all know what happens next. 1920, the 18th Amendment of the U.S. Constitution was put into act. This was prohibition, and basically alcoholic beverages were not allowed to be sold to consumers. So in the early 1800s, breweries in the United States had almost tripled. So I read an article that said that it was about 286 breweries total. Come 1920 with Prohibition, most breweries tried to find a way to keep production going with non-alcoholic products. I mentioned craft cheese, malted beverages are another one I'll mention either in this episode or another one, but milk products was another one. People really tried to keep their operations alive by doing non-alcoholic production. But thankfully, on December 5th, 1933, the 21st Amendment was repealed officially and Prohibition was over. Excuse me, I said that wrong. The 21st Amendment was not repealed. The 21st Amendment was enacted, and that repealed the 18th Amendment and then put an end to Prohibition. That was actually an interesting process overall. So the first portion of that was actually signed in early 1933, and then the effects and officiality of it didn't come till December. So it took a long time to get that going. We can talk about that later. Anyway, so Americans were pretty excited about Prohibition being done. But our country started to focus on some other things at this time. We shifted from beer to supporting our troops in world wars. One would think we shifted away from beer. However, according to an article written by Brewers Digest in 1941, brewers at the time found a new demographic that they wanted to hit on: the American military service person. So, at that time, we had a lot of service people in the United States. They were getting ready to either go to either war, go overseas, and brewers kind of capitalized on that. And people serving in the military weren't upset about it. Government at that time had agreed that beer up to 3.2% ABV was allowed to be shipped and distributed to American troops. They even shipped it overseas. Okay, let's do another beer break. We got to do it. Still good. If you're following me and listening to this episode, drop a comment below on what you're drinking, or drop a comment on where you think I am and what I'm drinking. The Hoppy Girl name doesn't come for no reason. I love my hops. So anyway, back to history. Prohibition, Great Depression, and both world wars, the industry took kind of a big hit. By the 1970s, there were only about 100 breweries left operational in the United States. Almost all were owned by larger companies. On October 14th, 1978, however, homebrewing was re-legalized in the United States, so that sparked another rise back in the industry. So breweries went from about 42 in 1978 to over 2,700, over 2,700 in 2012. All right, enough with the old stuff. Let's get to some current-ish statistics. So if you haven't looked at the Brewers Association website, you need to. They have all up-to-date statistics. They really do a nice job of putting it into different graphs. They do it state by state. Their listing and their website in general is a huge resource, and I used most of what I'm going to be quoting right now is from them. So thank you, Brewers Association. Another cheers. We got to do it. The statistics come out around April to mid-year of every year for the previous year. So the statistics I'm going to be telling you are from 2022. We're currently at the end in October of 2023. So the statistics for 2023 will be out in probably about 6 months or so. Okay. I would love to say that I have this memorized. I don't. So I'm going to look down mostly at my notes to give you all these numbers so I am pretty accurate with it. Okay. So, in 2022, the total number of brew pubs, tap rooms, microbreweries, regional craft breweries, and large non-craft breweries was 9,709. Craft breweries, so everything except that large non-craft, was 9,552 at the end of 2022. That's a 3.7 increase from 2021, so still doing pretty good. There was 3,418 brew pubs, 3,838 tap rooms, 2,035 microbrews, 261 regional craft brews, leaving 157 large non-craft breweries. As far as openings and closings go, there was 354 microbreweries and tap rooms that opened, 171 closed in 2022. All right, the craft brewing industry is huge. According to the Brewers Association, again, there's about 500,000 jobs in the United States. Now, I didn't write this stat down, so didn't write it down. I believe the website also said that there was over 100,000 jobs in the walls of a brewery alone. So the rest must be distributing and otherwise, but that is a lot of jobs in the United States. It's a $72.2 billion industry. Just for some financial comparisons, I looked this up just for fun. So obviously the craft beer industry cannot compete with things like Walmart and Amazon. Amazon is $1 trillion business. Walmart is a $300 billion business. But where are my Target lovers? I love a good Target. Target is a $50 billion industry. So think about that. Target is a $50 billion industry. Craft beer, $72.2 billion. It's pretty cool. So it doesn't supersede the Walmarts or Amazons, but it hangs with the Targets. It's pretty awesome. In the state of Colorado, just for fun, all my Colorado beer lovers, it is a $2.2 billion industry. The number one state in the United States is California with an $8.8 billion industry. All right, I've got a bunch of beer facts that I'm going to shoot your way just for fun. Okay, National Beer Day is April 7th, celebrated every year. That celebrates the Cullen-Harris Act. What is that, you say? Franklin D. Roosevelt, our president in 1933, signed into effect that led to the repeal of the 18th Amendment, ending Prohibition. The most common beer style produced in America is the American lager. Duh. But light beers in general make up approximately 52.8% of the beers sold in the United States. Top three breweries are Anheuser-Busch, Miller Coors or Molson Coors. They kind of have combined. We can talk about that in a different episode. And Pabst Brewing Company. Top brands sold in the United States. Bud Light comes in at 28.3%. Budweiser comes in at 11.9%. And Coors comes in at 9.9%. Let's talk about craft breweries. So the top 5 craft breweries in 2021, according to the articles that I read. Yuengling coming in at number 1 in Pottsville, Pennsylvania. We've already discussed them, but they are pretty popular and sought after beer. Number 2, Boston Beer Company in Boston, Massachusetts. They're responsible for Sam Adams. Sierra Nevada is number 3 in Chico, California. 4, I hope I'm saying this right, Duvel Mortgat. Look right here. It's spelled right here. Here's their logo. They have multiple locations, California, Missouri, New York. They're actually headquartered in Belgium, but they acquired several breweries all over the United States, Boulevard Brewing being one, Firestone Walker being one. Last but not least, number 5, Gambrinus. Last but not least, Gambrinus Brewing Company in San Antonio, Texas. They're responsible for the Shiner beers. All right, guys, last fact for you. Beer is the number 1 most popular alcoholic beverage in the United States. 85% of the volume of alcohol sold in the U.S. is beer, and 80% of convenience stores around the country sell beer. So why do we love beer? Turns out lots of people like beer. Okay, that's a wrap on our inaugural episode of the Hoppy Girl Podcast. Thanks for joining me for the history of American beer. I had a lot of fun researching it, but let's connect. Tell me your favorite beer fact. Tell me something I missed. This was all history according to Lindsey, but I want to hear from you too. I'm on all the socials, Facebook, Instagram, YouTube, at Hoppy Girl Podcast. Please like, subscribe, follow, leave a kick-ass review, and I look forward to seeing you next week for the history of Colorado beer. Cheers.